So this reflection is based on a story in John chapter 2 verses 1 to 11, and it's a story of Jesus turning water into wine. So for those who don't know the story, Jesus' mother and Jesus and his disciples were all invited to a wedding. And partway through the proceedings, or at some stage, Mary came to Jesus and she said, look, they've run out of wine. Now, hospitality in those days was such an important thing that for a wedding feast to run out of wine in the middle of the wedding feast would have been an absolute disgrace. And so the family would have lived in disgrace for the rest of their time. Jesus didn't seem to respond to Mary, but Mary still went to the servants and said, look, just do whatever he tells you. So Jesus told them, go and fill the water jars that are at the entrance. Now these jars held about somewhere between 20 and 30 gallons of water, and they were there so that the people could wash their hands in the ritual manner that was demanded in the Jewish law. So the servants did exactly what Jesus said, and it says they filled each one to the brim. So that would have been about 180 gallons or 350 litres approximately. Now he said, take some of it and give it to the head steward to taste. The steward didn't know what had happened, but when he tasted it, he was amazed, and he said, wow, this is the best wine. And he called over the bridegroom and he said, look, most people leave the good wine, or serve the good wine first, and then when everyone's so drunk they can't tell the difference, then they bring out the cheap stuff. But you've left the best till last. This story is the first one that John tells of Jesus, what Jesus did. And at the end of his book, he says, look, there are a lot more stories I could have put in this book, but I put these ones in so that you can see who Jesus was and believe in him. And so this is the first one he tells. What does it say? Well, firstly, it says he cares about people. If he'd done nothing, then this family would have been led to live in disgrace, probably for the rest of their lives. But probably more important is the symbolism of the water into wine. Part of the Jewish law was that before a person ate, they must wash their hands, and it was a very ritual way. They poured water down from the wrist down to the front of their hands. They had to rub the hands together. They had to pour the water 3 times. It was quite a ritual thing to do. In fact, one time, some of the Pharisees said to Jesus, they criticised him and said, look, your disciples aren't washing their hands before they eat. They weren't concerned about the disciples' hygiene. They were more concerned that Jesus obviously wasn't legitimate because he was letting his disciples do things that weren't in the Jewish law. But Jesus got stuck into them and he said, look, you bypass the commands of God just so that you can fulfill these traditions. Because in trying to be diligent about keeping the laws, the Pharisees had made so many little bylaws that it was almost impossible for a person to keep. But they were focusing now more on these man-made laws than they were on what God wanted of them. And so these water jars represented the man-made laws, and the people felt that they could purify themselves by these outward practices. But Jesus came to change that. He changed the water into wine, wine to drink. Wine works on us from the inside. And this is symbolic because Jesus came to change the way that we relate to God. It's not a case of outward behaviour. He wants to change us from the inside. Now the wine that was produced was of such an excellent quality that the steward was amazed. Yes, it came from something that was there to fulfill the Jewish traditions. It got transformed. Jesus didn't add to it, he transformed it. So Jesus came not to do away with God's law or the Old Testament, but to transform all the laws so that we keep them because that's what's in our heart rather than out of duty. We keep them out of love for God. Now the amount of wine was significant too. It was far more than was needed to save the situation. And that's God. He gives in such abundance. We can scarcely imagine how God gives. His abundance is something far better than we can produce in our own strength. So John puts this story first to show us in Jesus things are about to change, and they're about to change for the better. There's another symbolic thing which is sometimes easy to overlook. Jesus said to the servants, fill the water jars, so they filled them to the brim. If they'd only half filled them, then there would only have been half the amount of wine. You see, half-hearted obedience to God produces mediocre results. If we want to see great results, then it's got to be full obedience. The next thing, he says to them, now take some and give it to the head steward to taste. They didn't know. We don't know when the water turned into wine, but it could have still been water. And they had to act in obedience to Jesus and trust that everything was going to be okay. I mean, if it had still been water, they would have been in big, big trouble. So they acted in complete faith. There are times when God might ask us to do something that there is no guarantee that the outcome is going to be good. In fact, we might be made to look very foolish if it doesn't work. Because sometimes that obedience demands complete faith in Jesus, not in our own understanding. The last sentence of the passage says, and the disciples believed and had faith in him. They were already his followers, but seeing this, they now were able to have complete faith in him. And that's the example for us, that we too can have complete faith in Jesus.
Never give up. Never